Hi, my name is Michael R. Welborn II. I'm going to examine the relationship between environmental protection, character, and morality. It is difficult to decide what should be done to protect the environment. It is even more difficult to decide who should bear the burden in the protection of the environment. Policy here in the United States was set on its modern-day course by President Theodore Roosevelt. He was influenced by two people, Gifford Pinchot and Jean Muir. Gifford Pinchot believed in conservationism. That is, our natural resources should be protected to ensure their future use. Notice, use. These natural resources should be used to drive the economy and should be protected so that we could ensure that their future use is possible. Jean Muir was a preservationist. He was an immigrant who traveled the land, found his way to California mostly on foot, and believed the land was invaluable, that it held transcendental properties, that it could bring man above his current state. He believed that these lands should be preserved in their current status in perpetuity, that they should not be used in any way except to observe and to adore. Gifford Pinchot and conservation won out in the end. It would be impossible to stop using all these resources. The country needed it to grow, and grow it did. Preservationists, though, did win some small battles, such as the Archaeological Resource Protection Act of 1906, which, in a small few words, allowed for a president to declare national monuments. And Theodore Roosevelt used this to declare many monuments, which then became into a mode of preservation. It is not just business and the economy that the environment struggles to coexist with, but it is also humanity themselves. In one of the earlier examples of conservation, the British Empire was attempting to preserve or conserve teakwood forests in India. Teak was their preferred shipbuilding material. The problem they ran into, though, were the native peoples, the indigenous peoples, the Jum, which practiced slash and burn agricultural lifeways, wherein they would slash down a forest with fire, aka burning, clear the land, and then use the now suddenly nutrient-rich for a short time soil, and then move on and do it again. This did not work well with the British trying to conserve this wood for shipbuilding, and they needed lots of ships. Eventually, the Jum started protesting the outlawing of their lifeways by committing arson, by burning huge tracts of forests to show the British that you cannot stop someone's traditional lifeway without replacement. You cannot simply tell them they are now to be confined to a small area with no ability to start a new economy for themselves. From this, we moved on to some of the loudest voices in early environmental protection, and sometimes good things come from unexpected places. The environmental movement didn't start with pop stars and Bono. It didn't start with an all-star musical event. It didn't start with NGOs in Africa and siphoned aid. Some of the biggest proponents of conservation in the beginnings were big game hunters. These big game hunters first noticed they themselves were shooting these animals out of existence so that these animals needed to be protected. But then they realized that these animals were on top of a very precarious ecological system, and the whole system needed to be protected, and large tracts of land needed to be protected so that these animals could live within an environment in which they thrived, and so that, of course, they could continue hunting these animals. And that's really where the birth of the nature preserve comes from. It's not from a PETA approved place. Let's say that. As for a bit of humor, I added a photo of Melissa Bachman, which created a lot of controversy recently, and her big game hunting expedition. The reason that these big game hunters were there is that their home countries were colonizing Africa. As you can see in the image on the right, that the whole continent is carved up between European nations, Western imperialist nations, if you will, that had used their home resources and they had the incentive to colonize these places because these places were resource rich, or at least they were hoping they were. And they were there to take as much of these natural resources as possible. And little care was taken to conserve these natural resources. It was very late in the game when they realized that they had, in a very short amount of time, reduced these new colonies to similar amounts of resources as their home countries. They had depleted them. And in this process, even less care was taken of the native populations. I point out Belgium jokingly in the slide because King Leopold in Belgian Congo, he used Belgian Congo as sort of his own personal treasure chest. And he did not do it in a very friendly manner. In fact, it was brutal and terrifying. But it's one of many examples. And just to reinforce this, the question is not whether or not we are making a huge effect on our environment. We're definitely negatively affecting our globe in very many ways. It has even been proposed by geologists and anthropologists that we have exited our what is commonly known as the Holocene, stemming from about 12,000 years ago, our current climate, in which humanity created civilization and prospered into what it is today. And we've now, in fact, entered the Anthropocene epoch, in which what this means is that the greatest impact on the globe is not natural processes or geological processes. It's humans themselves shaping the world. We are shaping the environment and the very face of the earth. The question becomes, what are the best ways to mitigate these negative outcomes in a way in which we can continue to live a life of comfort, of which we've come to expect? But not only that, but just to continue to thrive and move forward. And then also, and just as important, if people are going to be negatively affected by efforts to protect the environment, which people should it be? Which people should bear this burden of environmental protection? Can you place it on one people? And are you unknowingly placing it on disadvantaged peoples who have no or little voice? When we consider the environment, we need to put people in the equation. When we are mitigating negative environmental impacts, we need to make sure that we are not creating negative impacts on people. Just as Americans would not be expecting to be forced off their land without due compensation, say an American rancher in California with his cattle should be told he can no longer herd his cattle and he needs to give up that life and move to a place. We shouldn't expect anyone else to do the same. In Africa, many native peoples are displaced. The Maasai cattle herder you see on the left is just one of them. And we need to make sure that even those who don't have a voice as loud as a probably pretty well-off rancher in California, we need to ensure that the Maasai cattle herder has the same voice and is considered in the equation just as much. And just a side note, it's hard to tell someone not to do what you're doing. There's been many cries lately about what is happening in Brazil in many aspects, but the destruction of natural resources there is quite rampant, and it's difficult to tell them not to cut down forests or set them ablaze, as you see in the left image. Farmers and ranchers making room for soy. When we did the same thing, we dried our wetlands, we plowed our forests to promote agriculture, and we, as you see on the right, an open pit iron ore mine in Brazil. We have the same in America, coal mines and whole mountaintops taken off in places like West Virginia. So it's difficult to tell someone not to do what you yourself are doing, to tell them to be better than you when they are in fact in a lesser position.